Good morning and welcome to Our Stories. Our guest this morning is Dick Ward. Dick and I have been talking a little bit ahead of time about his experience he's going to share with us, which is about a summer job that he had when he was young and the impact that it had on him in that experience. And when you talked to me, you told me that, it was a job that a friend of yours got for you on the railroad. That I was wondering whether your friend's father had said anything to you or anything like that to prepare you in any way for working on the railroad?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Nothing. He handed me a key and a book.
Okay. How about your own dad? Did he say anything?
No, he didn't.
He
And it was kind of interesting because his father was an engineer for Illinois Central.
Yeah. I'm surprised about that.
Yeah.
Maybe he decided, well, we'll let you experience that and, see how you react.
I think they were just happy to have had a job.
Okay, good. Well, you said that once you were in it, that you felt like you were living in two different worlds with a different language, different activities, different rules. What kind of differences are we talking about here between what you were used to and kind of what your time was like on the railroad?
Different language, different dress. These were hard-working people. But, the only time I had contact with them was actually on the train.
Yeah.
Because once we pulled into the yards, I never saw them again.
Yeah, everybody went their own way.
They went their own way.
Was there ever a time when you were in switching back and forth between those two kind of operating modes when you got mixed up and were the wrong person in the other environment? Or?
Well, not really. I did have one incident. We had pulled out early in the morning and arrived in East St. Louis. My run was from Mattoon to East St. Louis on the New York Central when it existed. And I got in early in the morning and I was hungry. Now I knew there was an all-night diner just a couple of blocks from the yard. And so I was walking down to the diner and came to a traffic signal, and I was standing there waiting for the light to turn. And a guy came up to me and asked me for 50 cents for the cup of coffee. And I don't know whether I looked at him strange or what. All at once he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were working this side of the street." He thought I was a panhandler. Boy, I must look pretty bad.
So how much physical strain was there in what you had to do on the railroad?
Well, my job, I was a front-end brakeman for freight trains, and my job was to my delight, was to blow the whistle at all the crossings. And so I had to, at the crossings there was when you're driving down the road, there's a white board with a black W on it, and we call that a whistle board. And it warned us that a crossing was coming.
Mm.
So I had to blow the whistle on the engine. That was part of my job. And it was back in a time when the freight cars were built differently. The axles had a box on the end, and they'd stuff those boxes with oily rags, and had oil to lubricate the axles.
Mm.
And if they went dry, they caught fire. And would say, well, you had a hot box. So part of my job was to keep an eye on both sides of the train for hot boxes.
Mm.
The key was for the lock for the switches. So I had to turn all the switches, and then basically my basic job was unlocking cars and recoupling them. on the freight train. So, like if we had to drop off grain cars well, my job was to cut the cars off and get them over and then rehook the train back up.
You mentioned that one of the things that you were exposed to was unions and learning about unions, and what kind of things did you learn about, union environment?
Well, I knew that I belonged to a union when I got my first paycheck, and I looked down and there was a deduction for the union. I had no say in the matter. I was just automatically a union person.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get used to some of the, I don't know what you call them, rules or what. For instance, I could only work so long, 12 hours. I had one incident where we went down to East St. Louis and turned right around and came back. And we got about 2 miles out of Mattoon into the yards. Engineer stopped the train and said, "Okay, Ward, go call them, tell them, bring a crew out, take us in." Well, I didn't know why at the time, but he explained to me, well, we only work 12 hours. So wherever they were on the track, they just stopped the train. Somebody had to bring an engine out with a new crew and take that train on into the yard. And then we had a thing that we called deadheading. They would call me up and they wouldn't have someone for the crew down in East St. Louis. So I'd have to get onto a passenger train and go down to St. Louis and get over to East St. Louis to make up the crew. They called that deadheading. And I got paid for everything. If I deadheaded, I got paid. If I worked extra hours, I got paid. I mean, I was making all kinds of money, and for a kid just out of high school, I couldn't believe it.
I'll bet.
I couldn't understand some of it, but of course, being new, they didn't really do a whole lot to go out of their way to train me.
No.
Each problem was solved as it came up. Otherwise, there wasn't a whole lot of conversation. And some of the conversation was, again, back with union. It was at a time where they were talking about feather bedding.
Yeah.
And feather bedding was a situation in which they called him a fireman, and he was part of the crew in the engine. There was myself, the engineer, and the fireman. Well, there was no fire. This wasn't coal operated engines, these were all diesel, so really what was his job?
Yeah.
So, after I left, a few years later, they eliminated that position.
Do you see any stuff that went on and how people treated each other that you were uncomfortable with?
Whenever we pulled into the yards down at East St. Louis, there was a phone booth in the yard, and the engineer would slow the train way, way down. And the fireman would jump off, and I noticed he had a little book in his hand, and I'm sure it must have been an address book. And he was on the phone, and like I said, there was a place for crews to lay over, but I never saw them. They all disappeared. And I'm sure it was because they had other lady friends at the other end of the terminus, and so.
So in terms of kind of life lessons, I guess, were there any that came out of your work on the railroad that from that summer that you thought were, things that were kind of important for you to have acquired there?
Well, most of it was ending up in East St. Louis. East St. Louis was a city that was deteriorated, very poor, and the people in where the yards were was a poor district of town. And you know, I met the prostitutes and the alcoholics and the drug users and the working people and people whose language I didn't understand. There was a mixture of people.
Yeah.
And all of these really, when I thought, you know, going back home to my little city of 16,000 people, growing up in, I guess, kind of a sheltered life in
Sure.
a way,
Yeah.
and to see this all at once and see life happening as it really was,
Yeah.
people struggling to make a living.
Well, how would you have felt if one of your sons at the same age that what you were said, "Oh, I got a job for working on a railroad this summer"?
Well, if it was the same kind of job I had, I wouldn't mind, other than for them to be cautious, because, you know, you're talking about tons of steel.
Yeah.
And I have known guys who've lost arms and legs and things that have worked on the railroad. And so I would certainly be cautious and worry about them.
Yeah. Any particular things that you walked away with in terms of thinking about, you know, things that were helpful, maybe on other jobs that you had after that? Or
Well, it made me realize that I was going to deal with the children of all kinds of people. And hopefully some of my experience let me be a little bit more patient in what I was doing and a little bit more thoughtful. And that somehow I could relate to them regardless of my status in life or their status in life. And,
well, that's very interesting, and thank you for sharing that.
well,
with us.
absolutely,
So,
yeah. Like I say, it was my coming of age, I think, and it was kind of a Damon Runyon experience.